Okay. So I'm gonna talk about staying afloat, running a big open source project. So 8 years ago, I wrote a script to turn on the lights when the sun sets. I decided to put it on GitHub, and I named it Home Assistant. Fast forward to 2019, at the State of the Octoverse, which is where GitHub presents like the most active projects in the world, we were the 10th most active project in the world. In 2020, the year after, we were actually the second most active Python project in the world. We were this with over 8,000 people had interacted with Home Assistant. Now, some people, when they hear the stat, is like, whoa, this is amazing. This is like 8,000 people. This is larger than most companies. But what I see is like, well, that's also 8,000 opinions of people you have to deal with and things you have to do with. And actually, if we go back to the 2019 slide and we look at the projects in these top 10, most of these projects are actually backed by billion-dollar companies. And this is great, of course. They're spending their money on open source. This is great. But we are there also. And the way we do it with Home Assistant is that we actually also have a company, but it's my company. The way it works is very simple. We have Home Assistant, which is freely available for all the users to use. Then users can choose, optional, to subscribe to Nabokasa. And Nabokasa then hires developers, including myself, to work full-time on making Home Assistant better. There's no investors, no loans, so this is a very direct relationship. And together with the users and developers, we've been able to keep running Home Assistant. But today I want to talk about like, how do we keep such an active project running with a relatively small budget, especially compared to these big billion-dollar companies? Well, when I talk about these things, I like to like very simplify the first step, is that we have a maintainer and there's an amount of work a maintainer can do. However, what happens in open source is that it's actually more than just writing source code. There's issues, releases, bug fixes, hot fixes, communication, documentation, keeping everything up to date. And what ends up happening is that there's more work than a maintainer can handle, which results in no maintainer. And the problem with having no maintainer is, A, this person is probably scarred for life. This person will probably tell the friends, don't do open source because this sucks. And third, there's one open source project that's not being maintained. That's not a building block we can use in our own projects. So today I want to talk about what we do in the Home Assistant to kind of like, reduce the workload. And this kind of boils down to 3 categories. The first thing is just certain things, just don't do them at all. The second thing, offload work to people that are going to contribute to the project or to automations, so that way it does not come on the maintainer's plate. And the third is to recruit more maintainers so you can share the workload. So before I talk about all the things that we do in Home Assistant, a disclaimer, these things work for us at Home Assistant, and they might or might not work for you. That's, of course, every project is different. I have tried to highlight the things that I also think apply to smaller projects. All right, the first thing that's important is just define a scope of what you do and don't want your project to do. If you define a scope and you get a contribution that's not within the scope, you can just say this is not something we're going to implement, and then you just close the pull request or close the issue. You can ignore all the follow-ups because sometimes people want to discuss with you why they don't want to change the scope, but that's not, be always very firm saying, listen, this pull request, this issue is not the place to discuss our scope, and just have another location where people can discuss scope. That way it's no longer tied to a single contribution, and it makes discussing a lot easier. But the second thing is, you don't owe anyone a single second of your time. See, if people are discussing things that you don't want to implement, and you've already stated that, you don't have to keep jumping into discussions. Just let it go. A lot of times you see that if you keep discussing it, people will keep being fired up about it and talking about it. But if you just ignore it, it tends to die down. And if people get disrespectful, just block them, because you don't owe anyone a single second of your time. And so there's a great open source, there's a great code of conduct you can add to your open source project, the contributor covenant. Just add it and enforce it. It will make your community a lot healthier. And the same for social media like Twitter. Don't interact with people you don't want to interact. There's so many people that will not take the time, the due diligence to learn about your project, starts having all these opinions, start talking shit. just block them. There's no reason you should even see those things when you open your app. The other thing is you should adopt a code formatter and linter and have those things automatically be enforced when people create commits and with GitHub Actions. The beautiful thing about a code formatter is that you eliminate a whole group of discussions. Should there be a comma here? Should this be on a new line? Should we sort imports? All that stuff is just taken care for and automatically applied. That way it also doesn't generate extra work, and it just works. And the same thing with linters. Linters are great because once you have a code formatter, all the annoying lint rules are generally style related. They're all gone. And then it's only about like finding bugs or bad code practices. However, if you do find a code practice that you are like, I kind of don't like this one to be enforced, just disable it. Don't feel forced to like follow a default rule. And if you feel like, well, I want to add a linter, but my project is not like up to the standards that I would like the project to be, every linter has a configuration file. You can actually exclude your existing files. So make sure that your linting only applies to new files. That way you can gradually adopt it and eventually get to the place where everything goes to the linter. The other thing that's important is to automate all the things. See, with GitHub Actions, it's so easy to automate and there's so many great things. So here's a few of my favorites. The first thing is Dependabot. Dependabot is a bot that will automatically look at your dependencies and will automatically open pull requests to upgrade these dependencies. And you can say limited to security updates or limited to or just do everything. And this is great because this is, again, work you don't have to do. Automation will take care for it. The second thing is Release Drafter. Release Drafter is this little bot that it will, every time a pull request is merged, it will make sure there's always a draft release ready in GitHub with all the titles of all the pull requests already linked up as well. So if you're ready to do a release, just edit this release. You add some notes about it that you want to highlight. You hit publish, and it's done. And then once you hit publish, you got to make sure that tagging a release does all the release chores. So for example, if you're working on a library for Python or JavaScript, just make sure it automatically gets pushed to PyPI or NPM. Make sure it builds Docker containers. Everything is pretty much possible. Now, of course, the thing that a lot of people use, but I do want to highlight is make sure you automatically run your test suite on each pull request. Because every time a pull request comes in and automatically a lot of checks are being run, this gives early feedback to the contributors. This is feedback the maintainers don't have to give anymore. And actually, a contributor can work with its own contribution on making it better before a maintainer even gets to look at it. This means as a maintainer, you review higher quality contributions. The last two bots are, one is close still issues. This is a great bot that will go through all old pull requests and issues. This is configurable. It will look at them, see when the last activity was, and then it will say, okay, it will make a comment on this issue saying, hey, if you still have this issue, please post a comment. Otherwise, we're going to close it in 3 days. A lot of issues will actually run still. Nobody will comment on it, and it gets closed. This way, you kind of keep your plate clean. Because if your issue tab gets too big, you might stop looking at issues because it's too overwhelming. So just clean it up if you're never going to look at it anyway. If the issue still happens, people will probably open it up again. The last bot I want to highlight is the one that logs all pull requests and issues. This is a great little bot because often when you get a comment on an old pull request or issue, it's useless. It would be better suited if this person had created a new issue. Because with a new issue, you require people to submit their logs, their version numbers, and you actually get the right information. So to just even avoid this from happening to begin with, just lock it. Be done with it. Not a problem. The beauty about GitHub Actions is that it's all based on YAML. And you can just go to your favorite open source repositories, see the automations they have, and actually copy it to your own projects. So just in case you're watching this back later, I've included some links, but the things we use in Home Assistant for Python, JavaScript, TypeScript, and for documentation, and they include all these things I just mentioned. It's really great to just copy. And then there's a ton more out there, just like because people make them themselves. You can also make them yourself. The other thing is create an issue template. Or if you can ask GitHub for early access to the issue forms. If you create an issue template, you're actually going to put more effort on the contributor to create an issue but it also means that the issues that are created are higher quality. You tell people, make sure you upgrade it to the latest version. Please include the version you're running. Please include a log file. I mean, a lot of times people think that just saying this doesn't work is good enough of an issue. And when you have an issue template, also make sure that you just don't comment when you see a issue come in and people didn't fill in the template. Just have like a default response that says, please fill in the template, otherwise we won't look at it. And then your stale bot will automatically clean it up if people don't do it. The other thing is invite all the contributors to become maintainers. Any regular contributor, empower them to join your project. Because people that join your project, they will share the workload. That way, they will also help review PRs, and together you can create standards on what works for your project. The thing is, don't be afraid that people are going to merge things that are bad, because this is GitHub. It's Git. It's version control. You know, we can always revert bad stuff. We can pull releases. We can fix stuff. You know, even in paid products, bugs get shipped to production. This will also happen in open source. And it's fine. You just fix it when it occurs and move on. Especially with all the automations, it will be easy to create a new release. So don't worry about it. The second thing when it comes to contributors is that I suggest to start a Discord server. That way you can easily communicate. From the Home Assistant experience, we started with an email, with GitHub issues only, then with the email list, then with a forum, and then with chat. And with every step, the bar for sending a message got lower and lower and lower. And with every step, the relationships among the users and the maintainers become better. Because all of a sudden, it's way easier to develop friendships if you don't have to blast an email list to everybody, blast an email to everybody on the email list, but instead you can just chat, etc. It's easy to get like a room together, etc. And this is good. And you know, you want to maybe open your Discord server for users too, but definitely keep some contributor-only channels, because not everything has to be open. See, the reason not everything has to be open is we're open source, our code is open, our development contributions as they get reviewed, except it's already open. But it doesn't mean that all the communication channels have to be open. Because why would you allow a random person that has never contributed to your project to give you an opinion on something that, like, on a big direction or something? That it's just not necessary. You need to find a balance, of course, but yeah, definitely keep something closed. At the end, you know, the most important thing is just, you know, take care of yourself and focus on the fun. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Paulus, so much for that presentation. I had an opportunity to talk to Paulus, not before because I wasn't around here to intro you, but we got to talk on the README podcast and learn about how Home Assistant got started. Folks, if you aren't aware, the README podcast is a new project put out by GitHub, where we interview maintainers about their origin stories as well as what they're working on today. So thanks for that, Paulus, and thanks for the conversation.
Welcome. Cool.
I'm curious though, your focus around automation too as well. Are there any cool automation tricks that you use in your projects that maybe tie in with Home Assistant?
No, not anymore. I used to be like, is the build failing? Have to reflect on like a light and stuff at home.
Yeah.
But that's just right now. It's like, no, when I'm at home, I should try to disconnect from work, right? So I should try not to have open source be there. I even don't have notifications on for Discord, for example, because it's important that when I have like, it should be opt-in when I get pulled into work and not like people to decide when to tag me.
Yeah. I mean, that is a great approach too as well. And also realizing that we are coming off of like a very interesting year in the world. If you're listening to this 10 years from now, there was a Panera that happened last year. You'll have to just research that and see what that happened. But if you're listening to this live, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But that's definitely a really good point. And thank you very much, Paulus. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Check out GatherTown if you haven't already been in there. I heard that people are now having Q&As about folks' talks within GatherTown.
It's true. I'll definitely stop by.
Yeah.